All right, we are live. This is Sound Booth Theater Live, and this is the cold reads of Dungeon Lord 5, part four of the cold reads. So, yeah, thank you guys for coming. Looking forward to getting a bunch more work done today. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit longer than I thought I was going to go because I just had a meeting canceled today. So, let's see. Let me look at exactly what my schedule is. Yeah, so it looks like I can go till 3 o'clock today. Not bad. Well, still won't be as long as, yesterday or the day before. I'll be I'll be doing about 5 hours tomorrow. But 3 hours today, not bad. Let's see here. Where's my... Here it is. So when we last left Dungeon Lord 5, we were let's see, we were in Ryan's apartment. No. No. Oh right, we just met the King of Heiliges. Right, who I cast Gary as. Let's see, chapter 7. No, that's exactly where we need it. And here is the script. All right. Not sure if Hugo's going to join us today, but I'll keep an eye out for him. And here we are at chapter 10. By the way, guys, don't forget the merch store. The Sound Booth Theater merch store is still there, and we just released Monster Hunt NYC as a cassette. It's the entire 3-book series in one USB, and pretty proud of it. As you guys may or may not know, Monster Hunt was our very first cinematic audio. So that whole series is very near and dear to me. Annie Ellicott and I narrated and performed all the music. This was also the first project that Aaron J. Morton worked with us on, who is now our lead composer here at Sound Booth Theater. So lots of history in the Monster Hunt series. Made a lot of progress yesterday. I think we're in page 160? Here we are. Page 144. So we're almost 20% in. We might even get to 30% tomorrow, which would be crazy. All right, so looks like we're going to start this one as an interlude. All right. Chapter 10. Interlude. That sounds like Ed. Chapter 10. Oof. Bruh. Sorry, guys. Just need to... Forgot one thing. All right, there we go. Chapter 10. Interlude. Chapter 10. Interlude. Examiner Harmon hated to travel via summoning circle. It was dangerously close to heretical magic, given that most of the beings who used such methods were fiends from the netherworld and dungeon lords that courted their favors. The fact that, years ago, Lord Wraith had forced him to retreat in such an ignoble fashion from a city left under his direct command still filled the old examiner with black rage every You know what? I think maybe that's a bigger deal than I thought. I don't have socks on, guys. I'm a failure. Real quick, I'm gonna put some padding back up that fell off my wall, and I just noticed it. It's having a negative effect on my sound. It's kind of amazing I'm able to squeeze back here. And I accidentally came back here without fucking scissors. Shit. That was unwise. Sorry, everybody. This is just bothering me. I gotta fix it. Where's my scissors? How did my scissors disappear? Worst timing. Okay, you know what? Here they are. Come on now. Well, that was a pain, but I got it done. Sorry, guys. All right, back to it. Hello, hello. That actually did improve the sound. I had to crawl behind my desk and replace some padding. All right. The fact that years ago Lord Wraith had forced him to retreat in such an ignoble fashion from a city. Oh. Here we are. Let's turn the camera a bit. There we go. Oh, video. Good call. Big breath for this sentence. The fact that years ago Lord Wraith had forced him to retreat in such an ignoble fashion from a city left under his direct command still filled the old examiner with black rage every time he stepped past the concentric silver circles. One more time. The fact that years ago Lord Wraith had forced him to retreat in such an ignoble fashion from a city left under his direct command still filled the old examiner with black rage every time he stepped past the concentric silver circles of engravings and complex glyphs. Whew. However, this was a war. Oh. I'm constantly being distracted and interrupted. I think someone's mowing outside. No, that's not mowing. I think that's, is that a plane? What the fuck? Something very noisy. Sorry, guys. It's just one of those days, huh? However, this was a war, and war required certain sacrifices. He opened his eyes and pawed at his whiskers and beard with his thick, sausage-like fingers, trying to keep the smell of burnt ozone away from his hair. Okay, so who's this character again? Harmon. Do you guys remember Harmon? Is it Harmon Cooper? Chapter 24 of Book 3.
So, how's your Saturday night going so far, Luke?
Where is this damn player? Here it is. Here we are. All right. A wizard exclaimed. Okay. So we know what Harmon sounds like now. You can only hear my voice. One sec. Loop back. There we go. That should fix it. I don't think he was I don't think he was a gnome. He didn't say it didn't seem that way. Your Eminence! A wizard exclaimed. We were not informed you would arrive today. The summoning circle rested at the very top of the guard tower of the Heiligian royal palace. A blue Heiligian sky expanded all the way to the horizon, where the familiar snow-covered mountaintops of the Viminal Ranges remained immutable. Just wanted to make sure I got that right. Around the palace stood the royal city of Relis. The civilized noises of the fabled metropolis were drowned out by the distance, as well as the disciplined yells of the militant trainees below the tower. The civilized noises of the fabled metropolis were drowned out by the distance, as well as the disciplined yells of the militant trainees below the tower. The servants of the light move on their own time, Harmon said vaguely, dismissing the wizard. The royal palace was the second most blessed grounds in Heiliges. Oops. The royal palace was the second most blessed grounds in Heiliges, with the first one being the militant church's own headquarters. Harmon always thought the defenses around the summoning circle were an unnecessary expense. Chances were any dungeon lord that somehow managed to set foot inside the palace would simply burst into flames. However, the nobility needed to be pacified, more so in the times when a weak king was unable to assuage their fears. Harmon went down the stairs, enjoying the familiar warmth of sunlight with every step. Galtia, by comparison, seemed to be forever cloudy whenever it was not pouring rain or hailstorm. Hailstorming? Pouring rain or hail, probably. Let's try that. Galtia, by comparison, seemed to be forever cloudy whenever it was not pouring rain or hail. Galtia, by comparison, seemed to be forever cloudy whenever it was not Galtia, by comparison, seemed to be forever cloudy whenever it was not pouring rain or hail, a cold, forsaken place for cold, forsaken people. The local nobility liked to compare the city to the crimson jewel at the center of a king's crown, flanked by the minor gemstones of the other cities. Probably a play on words because of the Galtian mines. The examiner thought of the city as a colored glass bead at best. He had long suspected... God damn it. What is going on with my script? Sorry, guys. Ah, my script just shit the bed. I don't know what the hell's going on. Here we are. He had long suspected He had long suspected that his counterparts in the militant church had sent him there to rid themselves of the influence from the Inquisition in local affairs. They probably desired to make King Varen easier to manipulate. The monarch's spine, it seemed, grew weak. The monarch's spine, it seemed, grew weaker with every passing day. Thus his visit today. Harmon was done playing nice. Sorry. I'm going to close all instances of Outlook because that's what makes that bleep bloop. Harmon was done playing nice. The courtyard. The courtyard was full of life in a way that reminded Harmon of the early... The courtyard was full of life in a way that reminded Harmon of the yearly pledge ceremony of new inquisitors, only without the pomp and circumstance. Hundreds of men and women trained as one under the direction of veteran sergeants, wielding short spears along with the tall, iron-reinforced oaken shields that were the mainstay of the militant army's battalions. Soldiers saluted as Harmon went by, ignoring everyone with the full dignity of an examiner. His gaze was almost straight up to the sky, a way to indicate to the rabble that his interest was only to the light and not mere mortal affairs. By the time he left the courtyard, he was sweating. Perhaps he had spent too much time in fucking Staravos. No matter. Once this accursed business with the Wraith was over, he could return home and spend a year in the church's pleasure houses, where young devotees would be glad to fan him with palm tree branches to his heart's desire. No matter. Once this accursed business with the Wraith was over, he could return home and spend a year in the church's pleasure houses, where young devotees would be glad to fan him with the palm tree branches to his heart. Damn it. No matter. Once this accursed business with the Wraith was over, he could return home and spend a year in the church's pleasure houses, where young devotees would be glad to fan him with palm tree branches to his heart's desire. The guards at the sides of the great door to the study went wide-eyed as they saw him approach. They wore polished golden armor underneath white and red tunics. They wore polished golden armor underneath white and red tunics and had on open helmets with huge feathers on the sides.
Your Excellency, we weren't told.
I know, Harmon told them, barreling past them as if they weren't there. He threw the doors open. 6 men and women sat around a table big enough to hold a feast. The study was the place where the late King Varen, father of his royal majesty, had... The study was the place where the late King Varen, father of his royal majesty, had held his meetings with his favorite advisors. With King Varen absent, it seemed that the advisors had kept to the tradition and failed to invite a certain someone. The room was a wedge around a huge, unused fireplace, a relic from a time where basic insulation spells hadn't been invented yet. Bookcases upon bookcases extended to the other side, Varen's personal library, which contains tomes Bookcases upon bookcases extended to the other side, Varen's personal library, which contained tomes so rare that the Inquisition hadn't put their eyes on them yet. It was a detail that irked Examiner Harmon just so. Not that Harmon cared that much about that particular detail. He was not a weakling library rat. He was not a weakling library rat. Damn it, dude. Noises upon noises upon noises. It's driving me nuts. He was not a weakling library rat. He was a man of action.
Gentlemen, so good to see you again,
he said cheerfully.
It seems the whole gang is around. And General Cicena, you are here as well. No doubt about to discuss the repercussions against the enemies of the light for taking yet another city from under our noses.
All right, have we encountered Cicena yet? Did she show up earlier in the book? This is page 145 in this book. She doesn't show up in book 4. All right, this is the first we mentioned her in this book, and she doesn't show up in book 3, so new character. Within the room, in no particular order, Marshal Encratis, Marshal Encratis, Marshal Encratis, Marshal Encratis, the oldest person in the room, with elvish blood, or so he claimed, flowing in his veins. He was in charge of the main bulk of Varen's forces. Archbishop Prisca. Excuse me. Archbishop Prisca, a fat man with the personality. Archbishop Prisca, a fat man with the personality of a cruel cat, leading the militant soldiers. Duke Quinto, a purebred rider. Duke Quinto, a purebred rider representing the Griffin Riders and the nobility. General Cicena, a minor baroness who had made a fortune as leader of a mercenary band. Finally, Spymaster Clemens, the left hand of the crown.
Harmon.
All right. I'm going to give Prisca to Ryan. Oops. Archbishop Prisca said, his mustache trembling with indignation. Archbishop Prisca said, his mustache trembling with indignation.
What is the meaning of this? You shouldered the expense of magical transoceanic travel just to complain about a backwater city your own forces failed to defend? My own forces. Archbishop, my inquisitors are giving their lives as we speak to stop a tide of corruption that Archbishop, my inquisitors are giving their lives as we speak to stop a tide of corruption the likes of which we haven't seen since the time of Sephar. It's not only the Wraith's monsters we're contending with now, but the entire accursed realm of Storavos as well. My holy warriors are stretched thin.
Oh, god damn it, it wasn't recording.
Archbishop, my inquisitors are giving their lives as we speak to stop a tide of corruption the likes of which we haven't seen since the fucking time of vibrating phones! Oh, man. Dirk Gently says, I often wonder, do audiobook narrators have special scripts they read from, or are they reading the book the same as we would? Most of them are reading the book the same as you would. At the moment, I am as well. But sometimes, a lot of the times, we actually do reformat the script to be like a script. Archbishop, my inquisitors are giving their lives as we speak to stop a tide of corruption the likes of which we haven't seen since the time of Sephar. It's not only the Wraith's monsters we're contending with now, but the entire accursed realm of Storavos as well. My holy warriors are stretched thin. My holy warriors are stretched thin, putting off rebellions all over the place. They toil hard he probably means toil. They toil hard every day, cleansing bandit infestations, rooting out undead dens inside of our own cities, repelling pirate raids in every trading route, and smashing monsters' nests. Damn it. They toil hard every day, cleansing bandit infestations, rooting out undead dens inside of our own cities, repelling pirate raids in every trading route, and smashing monster nests that multiply faster than we can burn them down. My own forces, Archbishop now, but the entire accursed realm of Storavos as well. My holy warrior. Harmon's voice grew louder and angrier with every word. He pushed an empty seat away and punched the exquisite wooden table hard. He pushed an empty seat away and punched the exquisite wooden table hard with both fists to punctuate his meaning. At least against Hines and his crazy bitch of a sister, we weren't fighting our supposedly pacified territories at the same time. He sounds out of breath. At least against Hines and his crazy bitch of a sister, we weren't fighting our supposedly pacified territories at the same time. Harmon went on, before anyone had a chance at interrupting. In the meantime, where are the Silver Knights? They are playing bodyguards to our king while he plays with his toys in another world. The world without the influence of the light. Well, I have news for everyone. King Varen's expensive toys, the so-called heroes that were supposed to replace my inquisitors in the eternal fight against the dark, are fucking broken. What are my undermanned inquisitors? What are my undermanned inquisitors supposed to do until you deign to load the troops up on our damn boats and send them on our way? Oh, cool. Thanks, Captain J321. Glad you enjoyed that interview. Thanks for coming, and I hope you'll share our channel with more people. Way!
Several men gasped with indignation at Harmon's mockery of the heroes. Duke Quinto and Marshal Incratis were red with anger, but they didn't dare contradict him directly. Not even the nobility was comfortable confronting the Holy Inquisition. That pleased Harmon a slight bit. At least those two hadn't forgotten their position in the world. Some people, on the other hand... General Cesena brushed her hair off as if checking if her makeup was still in place. Let's give this one to Lucky as well. Although I am a stranger in these lands, that although shouldn't even be there, I think. I am a stranger in these lands. However, I know that the coin my men are paid with is minted from gold mined in the Isles and Steravosi silver. Those vassal states were kept under control by the heroes built by King Varen. Interesting how you feel at liberty to question the king now that the heroic system is not functioning as it should, but not long ago were perfectly happy with the massive extra authority you received for controlling them. All right, let's leave some direction for Lucky here. The Archbishop gave Cesena a weary glance. He was no more a friend of the mercenary than Harmon was. Actually, let's give a little more direction. Nope.
General, the Inquisition accepted the heroes in order to better protect the innocent against the ever-evolving threat of the dark. Any perceived benefit of theirs is just that, perceived. Those blinded by Alita's holy light simply can't perceive nor care for such things as material possessions. However,
He turned to face Harmon, his considerable girth jiggling. He turned to face Harmon, his considerable girth jiggling due to the silver jewelry. Cluttering his body.
Examiner Harmon, measures have been taken against the threat in Storavos, despite the Wraith not being our only enemy. The militant army shall purify the corruption soon enough. You only need to hold up in the meantime and keep your faith as steady as your will.
Harmon gritted his teeth. And after the militant army occupies Storavos, I'm sure you'll just so happen to redistribute it a different way. One that benefits you, Archbishop, instead of more deserving servants of the light.
Servants that have actually fought and bled in that fucking place for years, you lazy shit.
No, he would not allow men like Priska, not even Varen himself, to take what was rightfully his. Not without a fight.
A city under the holy protection of Heiliges just fell under the control of the enemy, he said. Another one. I'm here wondering why the Steravosi arm of the Inquisition is constrained by scant men and coin, while others get to sit down comfortably in their home... Another one. I'm here wondering why the Steravosi arm of the Inquisition is constrained by scant men and coin, while others get to sit down comfortably in the homeland and decide to allocate those vital resources elsewhere.
Harmon said with a fake smile.
For the first time in decades, the enemy has a way to defeat our heroes. We ought to destroy Lord Wraith right now, before he has a chance to spread that knowledge to Lotia. Our hesitation could mean dungeon lords invading the shores of Heiliges for the first time in a... Our hesitation could mean dungeon lords invading the shores of Heiliges for the first time in a generation.
Clemens, a wiry man with a patch over his right eye, shook his head.
Your Eminence, if Lord Wraith wished to share this information with Lotia, he would have done so long ago.
And what is Clemens again? Or who is, Spy Master Clemens. I'll have to get more of his character first.
He said, Our intelligence is confident he's keeping the schematics close to his chest for the moment, as a bargaining chip to protect himself from the predation of other dungeon lords. Cooperation, as you should know, is not in their nature. If we push him before we're ready to deal a decisive blow, Lord Wraith may just change his mind.
The Spy Master was a close friend of King Varen and a bastard half-brother product. The Spy Master was a close friend of King Varen and a bastard half-brother product of old King Varen's whoremongering during his youth. Harmon knew listening to Clemens was the same as listening to the king himself, since their opinions rarely differed. Others around the table nodded. Some were cowards, others full of greed. Harmon's blood boiled. But he still had cards yet to play.
"Dung heap, Master Clemens," Harmon said. "We don't strike now, and we court disaster. The Wraith and Vanes now control the factory of nightmares. The Steravosi Dungeon Lord hails from the very same world where our beloved monarch... The Steravosi Dungeon Lord hails from the very same world where our beloved monarch got the knowledge for his creations. Who knows what horrors the Wraith may spawn inside Tillman's factory?" "And if it weren't for the betrayal of a certain Inquisitor, we would have been able to destroy the entire damn thing," he thought bitterly.
but he knew better than to mention that to the council. He and Priska traded glances full of meaning. It wasn't a friendly exchange, though it was a It wasn't a friendly exchange, though it was... It wasn't a friendly exchange, but it was conspiratorial nevertheless. The defeat inside the factory, the betrayal of an inquisitor, and the loss of a holy relic was private business of the militant church. The layman simply did not need to know the church was vulnerable to failing such tests of spirit. Fuck. The layman simply did not need to know the church was vulnerable to failing such tests of spirit.
His Eminence has a point. His Eminence has a point,
said Field Marshal Incratus. He was old enough that the memories of the Factory of Nightmares were fresh in his mind. Let me see if there was any description of Incratus. Excuse me. Oh, he says he's got elven blood.
His Eminence has a point,
said Field Marshal.
I buried family because of the acidic privy beetles Tillman unleashed back in 23. I buried family because of the acidic privy beetles Tillman unleashed back in 23.
Duke Quinto grimaced.
Hmm. 823 wasn't a fun year for anyone in Kratos.
He studied Harmon and the others.
The factory complicates things, yes, but the facts don't change. Our resources are limited, split between maintaining the heroes and the defense of our own frontiers.
I do not require a battalion, Duke Quinto. I only need but a few men, those chosen by Alita herself, men of real flesh and spirit instead of golems fashioned out of an unworthy mix of otherworldly technology and magic. He pointed at the Archbishop. Give me the Silver Knights, Your Holiness. Give our old traditions a chance now that the new ones have failed. With them, I shall strike at the heart of the Wraith before he has a chance to set his plans in motion. He made a ripping motion, as if he were about to throw Lord Wraith's beating heart upon the table in front of Priska.
The Knights?
Priska hesitated. His tongue licked his lips as if He licked his lips as if savoring the idea.
They serve mostly ceremonial functions these days.
General Cesena frowned and muttered something in whatever language they spoke wherever King Varen had fetched her from. General Cesena frowned and muttered something in whatever language they spoke wherever King Varen had fetched her from.
Okay, so I know Lucky actually listens to my reference file, so I'm going to go ahead and go redo her voice, because it says she speaks a different language. I'm going to give her like a little bit of a different...
I am a stranger in these lands. However, I know that the coin my men are paid with is...
Oh.
Paid with is... I am a stranger in these lands. I am a stranger in these lands. However, I know that the coin my men are paid with is minted from gold mined in the Isles and Steravosi silver. Those vassal states were kept under control by the heroes built by King Varen. Interesting how you feel at liberty to question the king now that the heroic system is not functioning as it should. But not long ago were perfectly happy with the massive extra authority you received for controlling them.
All right, there we go.
Assassinations and bodyguard duty, right? Sometimes I wondered why the church chose to keep such a powerful group away from the action.
Worry flashed in Priska's eyes, then anger. But Harmon came to the rescue. The militant church saw fit to reward them for generations of service. Sometimes the light's boon comes in this life as well as the next. The Crown agreed with this decision. The cost of maintaining both the Order of the Silver Knight and the heroes was prohibitive. He nodded toward Duke Quinto for token information. And anyway, the capacity for 10 men to hold control of an entire vassal state, no matter how powerful the individuals, is non-existent. Heroes, as others have said today, performed better in that regard. Now that the situation has changed, however, a powerful strike force to sever the serpent's head may be just what is needed. The Order worked against Sephar and Hines. No reason why it won't work again.
Thank you for the explanation,
Priska said, relieved. The real reason why the militant church had refused to risk the Silver Knights as of late was completely different from the official one. Alcroth had failed to respawn. The rest might as well. This turned the remaining Silver Knights from a fighting force into This turned the remaining Silver Knights from a fighting force into irreplaceable relics. Priska surely wasn't keen on risking them. But against a single dungeon lord? When the alternative was facing the Factory of Nightmares? Harmon could almost see the gears turning inside the fat man's head.
Perhaps you have a point, Examiner.
It was clear the mood among the table was changing in Harmon's favor. He held back a grin. The fear of the unknown, of what might lurk in the dark at the corner of one's vision, worked both on grown adults and children. The fact that the Factory of Nightmares was a very real danger only helped Harmon make his case. Spymaster Clemens must have sensed the shift as well.
King Varen is working a different angle, he revealed grimly. He has a way to stop Lord Wraith, and he's trying it as we speak. 2 of the Silver Knights are on Earth alongside him.
Okay, so I think I just realized this Clemens guy is the king's best friend, and Gary is playing the king. So I think I'm just gonna redo his lines as well. I'm doing a lot of redoing of characters' lines today. Sorry about that, guys.
Your Eminence, if Lord Wraith wished to share this information with Lotia, he would have done so long ago, he said. Our intelligence is confident he's keeping the schematics close to his chest for the moment, as a bargaining chip to protect himself from the predation of other dungeon lords. Cooperation, as you should know, is not in their nature. If we push him before we are ready to deal a decisive blow, Lord Wraith may just change his mind.
The Spy Master was a close friend. I liked that performance, so I'm going to keep it. But it was definitely different than the character I just did. So let me do that one again.
King Varen is working a different angle, he revealed grimly. He has a way to stop Lord Wraith, and he's trying it as we speak. 2 of the Silver Knights are on Earth alongside him.
Excellent, Harmon said. Then give me the remaining knights so we can crush the Wraith under our combined attacks. I don't need the entire order. My strike team shall be aided by my best inquisitors, along with the brave griffin riders that our nobility saw fit to spare, he said, he added, to keep Priska under control. More than enough to crush a solitary dungeon lord. Harmon didn't need to listen to their thoughts to know they would agree with his idea in the end. There was no reason not to. They are mine already, he thought. With both the Silver Knights and the heroes under his direct command, chances were not... With both the Silver Knights and the heroes under his direct command, chances were not even King Varen would dare strip him of his sweat-earned right to rule Staravos after the Dark was vanquished from the realm. He wasn't even convinced he wanted Staravos. He hated the place, but he hated the idea of somebody else having it even more. He had bled for those mosquito-infested marshes. No. Once it was under his full control, he would appoint some bureaucrat to handle the daily affairs, and he would take a well-earned vacation somewhere with a nice beach. Archbishop Priska had a palace in Elytra. Why couldn't he have one as well? No need. No, you need to catch him first. You need to catch him first, Clemens pointed out. We don't actually know where Lord Wraith keeps his hideout. We only know it's somewhere near Constantina. Let those that have their feet in Staravos handle that, Master Clemens. This time Harmon let the grin flourish into a fierce smile. I have a plan.
Just give me 8 rowdy boys and some mad lads. It's not like we were fighting a main character. I love that. Oh, Mirage Fiend.
Noxious fumes spread toward an alien, crimson sky, and the wind carried the inhuman scream of the Junker females and their progeny as the minions of Lord Radovic Steros. Noxious fumes spread toward an alien, crimson sky, and the wind carried the inhuman scream of the Junker females and their progeny as the minions of Lord Radovic Steros rode around the burning huts, wielding nets, spears, and crossbows. The burning huts, wielding nets, spear...
Damn it. One more time, stupid noises.
Noxious fumes spread toward an alien, crimson sky, and the wind carried the inhuman scream of the Junker females and their progeny as the minions of Lord Radovic Steros rode around the burning huts, wielding nets, spears, and crossbows. They had orders not to leave any survivor. No sense in wasting even a single experience point. Radovic studied the scene, standing atop a hill. The scant, dry foliage around him was wet with Junker blood, belonging to the 5 broken bodies lying downhill. The Dungeon Lord's steel mace, which he held distractedly, at his side, still dripped onto the thirsty desert rocks under his feet. Hunting for experience points in the Netherworld was a dangerous and expensive affair, but raiding the Lotian countryside was considered poor manners among the lordship. He cleaned off his mace on a patch of ill netherworldly weed. He'd earned about 200 points over the span of a couple months. Not bad. The loot, however, had left much to be desired. Chances were his sponsors, the High Clerics of Dolmenac, wouldn't recoup their investment in getting Radovac and his expedition. Chances were his sponsors, the High Clerics of Dolmenac, wouldn't recoup their investment in getting Radovac and his expedition on fertile hunting ground. Perhaps more civilized fiends would have left better treasure. But Junkers were as safe a hunt. But Junkers were as safe a hunt as it came, and Lord Radovic couldn't...
How did I pronounce his name earlier?
As were his sponsors, the High Clerics of Dolmenac, wouldn't recoup their investment in getting Radovac and his expedition on... Chances were his sponsors, the High Clerics of Dolmenac, wouldn't recoup their investment in getting Radovic and his expedition... Chances were his sponsors, the High Clerics of Dolmenac, wouldn't recoup their investment in getting Radovic and his expedition on fertile hunting ground. Perhaps more civilized fiends would have left better treasure, but Junkers were as safe a hunt as it came, and Lord Radovic couldn't risk losing his trained minions so close to the start of his quest. A 4-armed fiend with a head like a radish stalk climbed the hill, panting. He had an ugly Junker bite on his... He had an ugly Junker bite on his ankle.
My lord,
The Mirage Fiend said.
a convoy is approaching, led by a messenger from the Marquis.
Radovic shifted uneasily in his armor. The comfort enchantments of his breastplate weren't working as they should. A shoddy job by a shoddy enchanter. He decided he would have the minion flogged once he returned to his dungeons.
Okay. So let me find Radovic in other stuff. Is he in other books? He's not in book 4. And he's not in book 3. I'm going to assume he's not in books 1 or 2, because I don't remember him at all. I'm going to give this one to Ryan as well.
Finish the hunt yourselves,
He told the Mirage Fiend. He told the Mirage Fiend.
Unarmed. Unarmed junkers don't earn me any experience points anymore.
Oh, Connor M., you're probably right. Oh well, that'll probably get marked in the proofing. The Fiend perked up. Most dungeon lords liked to hoard all prisoners to execute themselves, even if they only gained trivial amounts of experience, leaving their minions to scramble whatever power they could... Scramble whatever power they could for themselves? That's not right. Scavenge? Or... what's another word for scavenge? Gather? To... scratch for? Let's say scavenge. Most dungeon lords liked to hoard all prisoners to execute themselves, even if they only gained trivial amounts of experience, leaving their minions to leaving their minions to scavenge whatever power they could for them. Leaving their minions to scavenge whatever power they could for themselves. Scrape together. Scrape together, I like that. Scrape, that's what it is. Oh, scramble to get, Bill Underbridge says. That makes more sense, too. Leaving their minions to scramble. No, let's leave that. Scrape together. Let's do scrape together. Leaving their minions to scrape together whatever power they could for themselves. Experience, leaving their minions to... Lord Radovic met the envoy from the Marquis down the hill, away from the village, far enough away that the screams were lost in the distance. The envoy arrived protected by a garrison of Lothian mercenaries on foot. He, on the other hand, was clearly not used to riding in the hellish landscape. He, on the other hand, was clearly not used to riding in the hellish landscape. He had brought a horse which was not a suitable mount for the netherworld. He, on the other hand, was clearly not used to riding in the hellish landscape. He had brought a horse which was not a suitable mount for the netherworld. The beast looked sickly, with foam tinted just slightly green coming out of its mouth. Radovic assumed it would not survive the return trip.
Marquis Adelvar could have just sent a message. Marquis Adelvar could have just sent a message,
he told the envoy. Radovic had spent a good chunk of his youth tending to horses. He liked them more than people, not that he'd ever admit that out loud. The man dismounted and bowed to the dungeon lord as his mercenary guards looked on several paces behind them.
The Marquis prefers a more personal approach, my lord, and messages can get tampered with. With. With.
His horse made a phlegm-ridden, throaty rasp, which the envoy ignored.
He sends his regards, his best wishes for the success of your expedition, and a list with his suggestions for any new talents you wish to add to your character sheet. A dungeon-busting approach is his favorite choice, given the circumstances.
Lord Radovic received the parchment, which was obnoxiously long, and pocketed it without a glance. Adelvar was many things, but a competent build designer was not one of them.
Yes,
Radovic said.
the circumstances.
The envoy pretended not to notice Radovic's mood, maybe trusting the protection of the Marquis to stop the dungeon lord from taking it out on the messenger.
He also sends a friendly reminder to make haste in returning home. There are many preparations left for your incursion. Lady Zorander already arrived in Yin, as well as most of the volunteer dungeon lords.
Okay, I know that name is... Here we go. Yin. Very beginning of chapter 5, book 4. Very nice. Chapter 4. Diplomacy.
Chapter 5.
The dancing purple light from the braziers lining the walls of the seat hall made the thick... Chapter 5. A champion's welcome. A roar rose up from the travertine walls of the great amphitheater of the free city of Yin as the two creatures smashed... Yin.
There are many preparations left for your incursion. Lady Zorander already arrived in Yin, as well as most of the volunteer dungeon lords.
So, the High Clerics are anxious I won't be there in time, and they are harassing... And they are harassing our dear Marquis,
Radovic mused.
Perhaps they worry I'll turn tail and run with their precious mantle.
He tapped his chest.
No need. House Steros may be impoverished. House Steros may be impoverished after the Endeavor's disaster, but we still haven't lost our honor. You can tell Adelvar No.
This is supposed to be...
No need. House Steros may be impoverished after the Endeavor's disaster, but we still haven't lost our honor. You can tell Adelvar I'll lead their incursion on my own if need be. The Lordship will have the designs for the Wraith's towers, and I'll have his head, along with my cousins.
Of course, my lord, of course, said the envoy obsequiously. The High Clerics merely wish to remind you to... The High Clerics merely wish to remind you to also bring back your cousin's mantle, which is more important to them than his head.
What does obsequious mean? Obedient or attentive to an excessive or servile degree. Okay.
Of course, my lord, of course, said the envoy. Of course, my lord, of course. Of course, my lord, of course. Of course, my lord, of course, said the envoy obsequiously. The High Cleric...
Anger and fear flared in Radovic's veins, but he reined them in. He was an older version of his cousin, Lord Lurrus Steros. He was an older version of his cousin, Lord Lurrus Steros. He was an older version of his cousin, Lord Lurrus Steros, broader of shoulders, without the duelist elegance of his cousin, yet trained in combat since birth. He was the last survivor of 7 brothers sent to build their character sheets against the heroes guarding the shores of Heiliges and had the scars to prove it. He was meant to become Lord Steros's trusted champion, an elite minion capable of crushing any threat. This heart inside his chest had never been meant to be his, and neither the responsibilities and ignominies it brought.
Ignominy.
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 Ignominy. Ignominies. And neither the responsibilities and ignominies it brought. What does it mean anyway? Get out of here. The incumbent party... public embarrassment. Okay. This heart inside his chest had never been meant to be his, and neither the This heart inside his chest had never meant to be... This heart inside his chest had never meant... This heart inside his chest had never meant to be his, and neither the responsibilities and ignominies it brought to his house, his family, the Marquis... This heart inside his chest had never meant to be his, and neither the responsibilities and ignominies it brought to his house, his family, the Marquis, and the Regents. It was all supposed to be Lurrus's burden. Radovic hated his cousin for it, hated him for having failed the endeavor, which was their house's last hope. Most of all, Radovic hated him for running away and hiding behind the cape of a foreign dungeon lord. That had been the final nail in the coffin of the honor of House Steros, their chosen dungeon lord becoming the maimed servant of another. It was no wonder that Radovic's father had been unable to cope with the shame.
The clerics will have their mantle, the lordship, their towers, and if the Wraith shows up, I'll bring Adelvar control of the factory on a silver platter as well. You go back and tell him that.
I will, my lord, the envoy said, as he made another bow. You are expected to return before the new moon. There's no point to an incursion if the Heiligian army arrives to destroy Lord Wraith before we can extract his secrets.
The envoy's horse made another weak, throaty gasp, and the man saddled up.
Secrets.
The envoy's horse made
Secrets.
The envoy's horse made another... I like being a dying horse. It's fun.
Your mare is on her last legs,
Radovic pointed out.
Yes, I'm aware,
The envoy said, raising an eyebrow.
I'll get a new one for the return trip. Remember, my lord, Lotia always has more children to replace the one that fails.
Lord Radovic Steros studied the envoy's bodyguards. They were Lotian toughs instead of the expensive rangers of the Netherworld mercenary company. The Marquis used for his own protection. Still, professional soldiers promised many more experience points than a score of junkers armed with spindly bone lances. Still, professional soldiers promised many more experience points than a score of junkers armed with spindly bone lances. His evil eye flared viciously. He was still getting the hang of being a dungeon lord, but he was learning.
Take what is offered, and give nothing in return,
the High Cleric of Dolmenak had told him.
Very well. Very well.
F for horse. He reached for the envoy's travel cape as the man turned to ride back, and pulled hard, dragging the man to the ground. What's
are you doing?
The envoy squealed, fighting to stand like an upturned cockroach.
I'm a messenger under the Marquis's protection!
As you said,
Lord Radovic said with a smile full of teeth. Lord Radovic said with a smile full of teeth.
Lothir always has more to replace those who fail. And you messed up, big kid. Never anger a dungeon lord.
He unslung his mace from his belt, and in the same fluid motion smashed the spiked steel head into the envoy's head.
Forehead.
His head. He unslung his mace from his belt, and in the same fluid motion smashed the spiked steel head into the... He unslung his mace from his belt, and in the same fluid motion smashed the spiked steel head into the envoy's forehead. There was a hollow crunch like a thick branch breaking apart, and the engravings in the mace flared as a transparent pulse of kinetic energy was released upon impact by the magical weapon. The hit turned the envoy's head into pulp, about half of which ended up smeared across Radovic's face and breastplate. Lord Radovic stood, dripping. The mare had taken a couple steps to the side, unaware of the fate of her master. Meanwhile, the bodyguards gaped at him with wide eyes for an instant. Then they drew their steel and rushed over. Radovic's smile tasted of copper and raw meat.
All right. That's it for that chapter. It's a long chapter. Not that long. I just kind of fucked it up a lot. What time is it? 1:30. Half my time done for just one chapter. Let's hope I do a better job on this one. Luris. Let's see if we have Luris in book 4. Yes. Ah, okay. Luris is... Okay, got it. Chapter 11. Missing Links. The Factory of Nightmares loomed silently like a black, jagged mountain under the sunless red sky of the netherworld. It was an abyss like a wound in the face of the world flanked its... It was an abyss like a wound in the face of the world flanked... It was an abyss, like a wound in the face of the world flanked its impossible structure. The expanse opposite the abyss was marred by craters made by a titanic clash of terrible creatures during a bygone age beyond the reach of history. Some of the petrified remains still stood where they had fallen, bundles of wind-swept jade bundles of wind-swept jade tendrils and wings that suggested shapes better left forgotten. To Luris Steros, a minor dungeon lord of a minor Lotian house, the scene seemed like it had been personally crafted by the dark gods to deliver a single message to any bystander that bundles of wind to Luris Steros, a minor dungeon lord of a minor Lotian house, the scene seemed like it had been personally crafted by the dark gods to deliver a single message to any bystander that happened to stumble in front of it. In the grand scheme of things, you probably don't matter very much. Luris gave the great skeletal factory a dubious look. Completely still, as it was now, it was almost impossible to believe it could take flight. What seemed like a lifetime ago, Lord Steros had delved into the bowels of the Standard Factory as the mighty champion of his house, with the hopes and dreams of his family resting on his shoulders. He looked at the couple of Haganashi mercenaries who had escorted him from the portal encampment. Okay. Sorry, guys. I gotta hit the bathroom. I'll be back. back at it. Here goes. He looked at the couple of Haganashi mercenaries who had escorted him from the portal encampment. If Vanes had landed the factory just a few miles nearer, we could have saved several hours of walking. Let me make sure that we're getting the right voice for him. Let's see. What chapter is this? 5. Let's go to chapter 5. What did I do? Order a bunch of drones to dig holes in the ground and set up a tower with... Okay, no English accent. Good time. Good thing I checked. And let's go ahead and take away his English accent. We could have saved several... If Vanes had landed the factory just a few miles nearer, we could have saved several hours of walking. He pointed out. One of the mercenaries shrugged. For them, it was business as usual.
I don't think the broken lady cares much about our comfort.
Steros nodded. Well, she could have at least landed it facing our way. In its current position, the factory's skull faced away from Steros and his escort. The second Kuftar barked a laugh. Oh, right, he's got Haganashi bodyguards.
I don't think the broken lady cares much about our comfort.
Steros nodded.
I don't think she cares at all, Lord Steros. I don't think she cares at all, Lord Steros.
Maybe I'll give this one to Gary.
A lifetime ago, a youthful Steros wouldn't have blinked twice at the thought of an extended walk. He had been eager to prove himself, to show the world he was up to any challenge. The young, emaciated man who now walked awkwardly toward the Factory of Nightmares was a very different person. He was painfully aware of how the sway of his arms was just a tad too fast for his walking speed, like a toy soldier marching through a make-believe battle. It was a maddening reflex, and he could not control it. His arms moved faster because they were lighter in all the wrong ways. Steros had once held his sword as if it was an extension of his arm. People all around Lotia spoke of him as his generation's best duelist. Then he had stepped into this very factory. At the memory, his throat went dry. Up close, the overall features of the primordial skeleton were lost. He only saw a wall of fossilized black bone towering above him.
This is as far as we go. Good luck in there, Lord Steros. As we go. Ours we go.
The Haganashi.
Ours we go.
The Haganashi told him.
Good luck in there, Lord Steros.
Haganashi told him.
Good luck.
The Hagan.
We go.
The Haganashi told him.
Even the famed monster hunters seemed glad they didn't have to set foot inside the damn thing. Even the famed monster hunters seemed glad they didn't have to set foot inside the Even the famed monster hunters seemed glad they didn't have to set foot inside the damned thing. Steros almost told them he'd return to camp with them. Steros almost told them he'd return to camp with them after all. But that would mean walking all the way back, too. A toy soldier patrolling uselessly in the sand. He approached a black joint, stretched open like a portcullis to reveal an even darker cavern. Steros could hear... What is a black... a joint? A black joint? What the fuck? Oh, Lauder Gaming. Don't choose me over your girlfriend. Steros could hear noises from within. Mechanical wheezing and low, distant rumbles that could have been breathing or periodical landslides. An air current, hot and dry, surged forth and drove his hair into his eyes while also shoving fistfuls of netherworldly sand into his mouth. On reflex, he tried to brush his face clean with his hands, then cursed quietly. For the second time in his life, Steros headed into the Factory of Nightmares. For the second time in his life, Steros headed into the Factory of Nightmares. Am I in the right place? Steros thought as magical torchlight flooded his gaze. He found himself walking near the middle of a vast vault, which had dull walls of polished stone and steel that used sections... Sorry, guys. He found himself walking near the middle of a vast vault, which... He found himself walking near the middle of a vast vault which had dull walls. He found himself walking near the middle of a vast vault which had dull walls of polished stone and steel that used sections of colossal ribs and vertebrae as support beams. Iron walkways extended for several layers above him, with wood and iron carts sliding up and down seemingly at random all around, powered by a complex system of ropes and pulleys he'd never seen back in Lotia. Okay, let's see. Let's go ahead and start some ambience here. The vault buzzed with activity. He almost ran into a couple of Batblin workers who wore haunted livery and solid iron helmets painted yellow. They held spear mops as tall as them, and each had a belt equipped with firefight. They held spear mops as tall as them, and each had a belt equipped with firefighting runes and flasks of various potions. They ignored him, instead hurrying toward what seemed like a trail of green slime that disappeared down a corridor. A fire alarm rang nearby. Abnetiers floated happily about, dodging the elevated railways and their wooden supports. Abnetiers floated happily about, dodging the elevated railways and their wooden supports, which grew like knotted tree trunks around the center of the room and extended in all directions, including upward, like elongated branches. Carts full of humans, Batblins, and an assorted bunch... Carts full of humans, Batblins, and an assorted bunch of colorful, tendrilful, spikeful, netherworldly fiends left from the boarding spot at the heart of the chamber. Steros had no recollection of this place being anywhere near this section of the factory. As far as he could recall, last time this area had been a warehouse. The standard factory was famously capable of shifting floor plans around, but the railway mess in the center of the room suggested the Haunt's work at play. Those of the Haunt worked fast and hard. They built cleverly, but no one had ever asked them to build safely. As if to mark his thoughts, a dry explosion detonated like a firework in the distance, and a couple more alarms went off. Few in the small crowd that gathered around the boarding spot even raised an eyebrow. Few in the small crowd that gathered around the boarding spot even raised an eyebrow. Unsure of where to go, but too proud to admit it, Lord Steros approached the crowd. He spotted a senior Batblin with hirsute gray fur ordering people around with the grace of an orchestra director. He spotted a senior Batblin with hirsute gray fur ordering people around with the grace of an orchestra director and the temperament of a hell chicken. The Batblin had an enchanted iron rod in hand that turned his voice into a roar loud enough to be heard over the chatter, and next to him was a bulletin board with what seemed like a map with railway destinations marked on it. The map was split into removable sections, and as Steros watched, another Batblin came running and shifted a couple of the pieces around. Sure enough, a few moments later, the entire vault trembled slightly as the screech of ancient machinery wheezed and coughed somewhere far above them. The vault buzzed with activity, powered by a complex system of ropes and polished stone and steel that used sections of colossal seemingly at random. The vault, but he almost ran into a couple of Batblin workers who wore haunted guns and flasks of various potions on a corridor. A fire alarm rang nearby. Couple of Batblin workers who he almost ran into a... The vault buzzed with activity.
Access to the mutagen processing plant is temporarily barred due to improvised maintenance. Access to the mutagen processing plant is temporarily barred due to improvised maintenance.
The director Batblin announced. A few fiends in the crowd moaned and left, dragging their feet. Steros couldn't help but wonder how the railways interacted with the ever-changing floor plan.
You!
The director Batblin jutted a long finger straight at the young dungeon lord.
Who do you think you are, standing still like that? You're impeding my traffic! Name and destination!
Lord Luris Steros. Lord Steros said with as much dignity as he could muster. I'm looking for the tour. That earned him more than a couple interested glances. Some of the nearby eyes studied his face, then inevitably traveled down to his wrists. People looked away. Steros pretended those looking at him didn't exist.
Luris Steros, Dungeon Lord. Luris Steros.
The Batblin stood still for a moment, listening to the air in the telltale fashion of someone waiting for a dungeon message. Finally, he nodded.
You are expected, and you have all the proper security markings. Very well. Cart 24B, Lord Steros. Good day.
The Batblin turned his attention to the others. Back in Lotia, if a critter had dared to treat even the lowliest of dungeon lords with such nonchalance, they would have been skinned on the spot, or put through something suitably unpleasant. Steros took no offense. The Batblins did not know proper lordship protocol because Lord Wright had never bothered to teach them any. Maybe a few of the newest netherworldly minions would have been eager to teach the old Batblin the important lesson, but they pretended not to hear the exchange. Rule number 1 for any minion with ambitions to live to retirement was simple: never piss off your dungeon lord, and everyone knew that Lord Wraith had a soft spot for the Batblins. Luris, headed for Cart 24B, sat between a pair of sleep-deprived necromancers and decided he could see Lord Wright's reasoning. Batblins had been the only creatures that had treated him like a person in a long time. To everyone else, he was either a terrifying superior, a cripple, or an asset. Someone pushed a lever, and Lord Steros was almost thrown off his seat when the cart suddenly and ceremoniously Someone pushed a lever, and Lord Steros was almost thrown off his seat when the cart suddenly and unceremoniously jerked to motion. Slowly, inch by inch at first, the cart climbed up its railway. It was a long way to the top, and Steros had plenty of time to gaze at the increasingly tinier crowd below and ponder his newly discovered fear of heights.
First time?
One of the necromancers asked him. When Steros gave him a faint, nauseated nod as a response, the man sniffed in sympathy.
Don't you worry. The climb is almost over.
They had already reached the tallest point in the cart's arc. With nascent horror, Steros realized the exit tunnel was now several feet below them.
The next part there, that's the one that sucks.
What part?
Steros asked. There was a brief, ozone-filled surge of magical aftershock just beneath Steros's feet, and then the cart plummeted through the railway.
It's a roller coaster. It will not be on our app, it will be on Audible. But yeah.
It is the funniest thing, these railway systems, said the elderly necromancer while the cart barreled through the entrails. It is the funniest thing, these railway systems,
said the elderly.
Damn it, guys. Ugh.
Said the elderly necromancer while the cart barreled through the entrails of the standard factory at terrifying speed.
We found the prototypes just lying around in ruined heaps, mostly turned to scrap, with a bunch of dead bodies nearby.
The emaciated man's voice was barely a muffled whisper as the wind buffeted Steros's ears.
The design was more advanced than the one we had in the Grey factory, so we just switched it up and added our own spin. The beetle workers handled the heavy lifting after that. They work slower than a dungeon lord's drones, but they're way sturdier.
Steros made a noise that could have been a grunt, or perhaps he was choking. Mostly in blurs, he noticed parts of the factory he'd visited during the endeavor. Signs of the haunted presence were everywhere. Habitats and botanical gardens were full of grotesque plant life. The furnaces spat out rivers of molten metal. Drainage pipes ejected waste, and mutagenic purple smoke flowed through the huge chimneys embedded into the factory's vertebra. The cart also passed ruined parts, though, where the mechanical beetles were still hard at work repairing the damage inflicted by the Endeavor and Sephar's sudden appearance. Steros glanced at a dilapidated wall with claw marks carved deep along its length, easily the size of his head. He shivered and turned to look at his feet instead.
Way sturdier. Yeah.
Steros made a noise.
Of course, everything would work far better if we had access to Tillman's patented schematics,
The necromancer went on.
But I suppose Lord Wraith and our broken lady are still bickering over that. We haven't seen either around here in a long while. He scratched his head dubiously. Then his gaze brightened. Hey, take a look at this. I built it. The young dungeon lord looked straight ahead, and regretted it immediately. They were in a cramped tunnel with steel fuselage running
Fuselage.
What is the plural?
Fuselage.
They were in a cramped tunnel with steel fuselages running above and below, and the railway ended a few hundred meters in front of them. Steros could see another railway continuing above and to the right, as if the beetle workers had gotten the building specs to this section wrong by a couple decimal points. Well, he had time to think, this is quite the stupid way to die. Well, he had time to think, this is quite the stupid way to die. Half a dozen yellowish appendages suddenly emerged from the shadows. Around the railway, long and thin, and half a dozen yellowish appendages suddenly emerged from the shadows around the railway, long and thin and jutting out in strange places along their length. They grabbed onto Steros's railway as well as the other. There came sounds of cogs turning and chains rattling, as well as something not entirely unlike 100,000 teeth clacking rhythmically against one another. Both railways jerked violently, but with precision, and Steros was almost thrown off his chair once more. The necromancers were flush with excitement. The cart passed through what was now a single railway, and Steros took a deep breath. So that's how you keep the rails connected, he mumbled. That mystery was solved at least. He looked at the bone-white appendages as they retreated back to their spots inside the walls. Wait, what? Bone-white? I guess bone-white could be described as yellowish? Are those undead? I've never seen a creature with a skeleton like that. I've never seen a creature with a skeleton like that. The necromancer gave him a toothy smile. That's because there aren't. Those are bones from different sources, reanimated together to perform a single adaptive task. It is one of the first innovations designed in the standard factory since the Lord's Wraith and Veins reopened it, added the other necromancer, who looked just as proud as the first. What color is this one? No.
Give us 100 more years and we'll bring Ivolus into a new era of magical development.
Steros suddenly felt a wave of shame.
You guys have been busy,
he said quietly, but the wind carried his words away. The cart stopped next to a well-lit corridor that, according to a sign, led to adaptive necromantic research. Wind carried his words away. The cart stopped. The cart stopped next to a well-lit corridor that, according to a sign, led to adaptive necromantic research. The necromancers climbed off the cart, their own bones audibly creaking with every step, leaving Steros alone. Then came another dreadful climb, and yet another terrifying drop, until finally, a few moments later, the cart came to a stop next to a richly fashioned corridor with wooden furnishings, expensive red rugs, and non-magical lamps bathing everything nearby in a warm light. There were 5 pale men and women armored in steel-black breastplates and full-face helmets, guarding a pair of carved wooden doors that could have been the entrance to a king's palace. A sign above the doors proclaimed in golden filigrees, "Administration."
Okay, Captain Isak. I have to go find him again. This is during the raid. Maybe it's chapter... No, it's chapter 4.
The fort is under attack! Come with us at once! We must get you to safety!
He was a middle-aged... and they were there. They'd killed the guards, and we... 6 men, by yourself? The captain asked, bewildered. I am an inquisitor, Stradzark Spider said.
we are infiltrators, not a match.
Oh, the Empress!
You see, at the...
We're exposed out here.
One of the fiends of her coven said.
Did we do...
On and off lover.
It's not a suicide mission, though. But I bet they don't look at blends and just smoked mincemeat the second they spot us. You'd have gotten used to tunnels by now, Master Kess. Incoming from Master Lavina.
One of the shamans announced.
I don't... Spellcasting support. Church's headquarters. Have them handle it. Tell them to get us some damned rain yesterday. It seems like we missed all the fun.
Poison, said the inquisitor that...
Such a cowardly tactic.
They must have infiltrated our force.
Fire! Look out!
Someone yelled.
Like this! Bull rush! Shield! City is lost. The heroes are not coming. Enough!
A dry voice exclaimed.
Enough! It's over. Look outside. Your city is lost. The heroes are not coming.
I found him.
Lord Steros,
said a tall man who had long blonde hair braided into a ponytail over his shoulder.
we only got notice of your arrival a few minutes ago, so the tour started without you. Still, you're welcome to catch up.
He smiled and revealed a pair of sharp fangs.
Provided, of course, that you pass our final security test.
Aren't the Lucky Five a bit too important to be used as doormen? Steros asked a couple of black-clad nightshades inspected. Aren't the Lucky Five a bit too important to be used as doormen? Steros asked, as a couple of black-clad nightshades inspected his person with a series of magical and mundane means.
Haunted policy is to make sure each commander is seen working to advance the war effort in every way,
said the blonde, who Steros now recognized as Captain Isaac. YSAAC.
Isaac. Isasi.
Isasi.
Stephanie Isaac. Stephanie Isaac.
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 These are all robots pronouncing this shit. YSAAC. It's a name.
YSAAC.
Isaac.
Isaac. I'm going to say Isaac. Said the blonde, who Steros now recognized as Captain Isaac, leader of the infamous team that had taken over Raventa's fort by unleashing a vampire infestation inside of it. Oh, crap. There we go.
Well, Lord Wraith not included, of course. Not unlike you.
haunted policy. Well, Lord Wraith not included, of course. Not unlike you, he has preferred to remain in the shadows lately.
The nightshades exchanged blank looks. Steros kept his face neutral as well. The last he'd seen of Edward Wright, he'd defenestrated Steros off this very same place,
in order to save the younger in order to save.
That's so awesome. He used defenestration.
The last he'd seen of Edward Wright, he'd defenestrated Steros off this very same place in order to save the younger Dungeon Lord's life. Shreku and the Carrion Avians had caught the wounded Steros and his companions as they fell, and had been Shreku and the Carrion Avians had caught the wounded Steros and his companions as they fell, and had then brought them to the haunt for life-saving surgery. When Steros had next awoken, the Standard Factory was, somehow, ruled by the newly formed Wraith and Veins partnership. Steros had no idea what had happened during the final, climactic part.
Probably climactic?
Steros had no idea what had happened during the final, climactic part of the endeavor, but he could fathom a guess. For whatever reason, though, Lord Wraith wasn't around. Kleck expected him to return, which meant he was alive and in relative safety. But now 6 months had gone by, and rumors of his absence grew with every passing day.
"Well," Steros asked, "am I a changeling after all? Or can I move along?"
He understood the need for the haunt to employ the Lucky Five, but he knew as well as every Lotian dungeon lord that Nightshade's loyalty could be a tricky deal. Just like Yarlin, the team's spawn mother, had proven in the endeavor. Steros had no idea how Isak and his team would react if they found out the haunt was currently acting without the leadership of the Steravosi dungeon lord.
Of course, Lord Steros. My apologies,
Captain Isak replied curtly.
If you will, my men will escort you to the tour's whereabouts.
However, Steros wasn't feeling particularly like sharing a dimly lit corridor with a blood-sucking monster.
"Don't bother, Captain. I'll manage on my own."
The idea of a dungeon lord being afraid of a minion threatened to make his face flush red in front of the vampires. The glass doors of the botanical labs closed behind Steros as a heavy stench similar to rotting meat assaulted his nostrils. The place smelled more like an abandoned butchery than a pleasantly scented palatial garden, and the things on display were related to roses and geraniums in name only. The place smelled more like an abandoned butchery than a pleasantly scented palatial garden. The place smelled more like an abandoned butchery than a pleasantly scented palatial garden, and the things on display were related to roses and geraniums in name only. Dotted yellow and purple stalks turned this way at...
Forgot.
Dotted yellow and purple stalks turned his way as thorny vines twitched hungrily from their glass enclosures when Steros passed them by.
In the center of the maze of enclosures waited a line of people listening with varying degrees of attention to a fiend guiding them through each exhibition's history. Steros almost turned back, but the idea of going through those devilish carts all over again was too much for him. He joined the end of the tour, hoping to remain unnoticed. Unlike his untested minions back home, each of these men and women were mighty commanders by their own right. They had raised and conquered cities on their dungeon lord's behalf, and now they planned to build a kingdom for him to rule above ground. First, he recognized Kleck Adventurer Slayer standing near the end of the line. Kleck was a giant in Batblin terms, hailed as a hero by the critters of the haunt. Those creatures men had... This is a weird sentence. Kleck was a giant in Batblin terms, hailed as a hero by the critters of the haunt. Those creatures men had thought too weak to survive on their own against the onslaught of the light. Over and over again, Kleck had proven those beliefs wrong. His snout twitched happily when he saw Steros.
"So, you came,"
Kleck said in a low voice. "Like you mentioned, some sun might do me some good," Steros said, "even if it's filtered through these hellish clouds." Next to Kleck was his horned spider, Princess Tulip. Next to Kleck was his horned spider, Princess Tulip, who acted as the representative of the spider Empress Laurel, who was by now too large to fit in most tunnels or... Next to Kleck was his horned spider, Princess Tulip, who acted as the representative of the spider Empress Laurel, who was by now too large to fit in most tunnels or doorways and instead spoke... Next to Kleck was his horned spider, Princess Tulip, who acted as the representative of the spider Empress Laurel, who was by now too large to fit in most tunnels or doorways and instead spent most of her time at the heart of Hoya Forest, the center of her ever-growing chitin domain. At the front was Kessa, the marshal of the haunt and the leader of all military operations on behalf of Lord Wraith. By her command, Raventa had burned and then fallen. Steros had heard she'd once fought and survived a creature similar to the Mind Brood-enhanced assassins that served Lord Sephar. Kessa was a tanned, wingless avian, all awkward angles and taut muscles, with a... Kessa was a tanned, wingless avian. Kessa was a tanned, wingless avian, all awkward angles and taut muscles, with a stern expression similar to a hawk's. She glanced briefly at Steros, then returned her attention to the head of the tour. Next was a rail-thin young woman, pale as death, the complete opposite of the marshal. Master Lavina, head witch of the haunt, a temperamental and terrifying spellcaster who was just as crazy as she was powerful. It was said that when the people of Raventa had tried to resist the invasion, she'd set aflame the spirits of the dead and had made them rain down upon the population as retribution. She did not even glance at Steros. She apparently was in the middle of a heated discussion against a book floating next to her, which flapped its pages angrily. There was also Chieftain Kaga, leader of the Haga Anashi, who spearheaded the armies of the haunt. The Haga Anashi were currently spread all over the haunted domain, hunting nightshade covens spawned by a certain traitor. Finally was Master Alder, the Chronicler, a self-chosen title that failed to explain nearly all of his responsibilities. Finally was Master Alder, the Chronicler, a self-chosen title that failed to explain nearly all of his responsibilities. He was the face of the haunt, the head of intelligence, the man who knew everything of importance that happened inside the haunted domains and outside of them as well. He ran counter-espionage, managed a large network of informants, and was in direct contact with the Thieves Guild as well as... Damn it. He ran counter-espionage, managed a large network of informants, and was in direct contact with the Thieves Guild as well as most of the many rebellions burning inside Staravos at any given time. It was said he had bedded 1,000 beautiful women, although those that claimed such were, unsurprisingly, under his employ. The rest Staros could not recognize, but in this at least his brief experience as a dungeon lord came to his aid. The rest Staros could not recognize, but in this at least his brief experience as a dungeon lord came to his aid. Most of them had gray hair and the worn brow of those used to shouldering heavy responsibilities, along with the round bellies that indicated they were nicely rewarded for that. Guild leaders, local politicians, merchants, nobles, and independent spellcasters, the sort of lot that formed the backbone of the proto-nation the sort of lot that formed the backbone of the proto-nation Edward Wright had promised during the conquest of Undercity. Judging by their uneasy demeanor, they weren't at ease inside the... Judging by their uneasy demeanor, they weren't at ease inside the Factory of Nightmares and had clearly been invited on the tour as a courtesy. Staros could sympathize with them. Most people, even in Losia, had never set foot into the Netherworld in their entire life. It was the stuff of legends, the sort of place mothers used to scare their children into behaving. I wonder if Vanes is seeing this, Staros thought idly. Judging from what little he knew of the dungeon lady, she probably wasn't too happy there were local nobility trampling about her domain. Her domain. Damn it. She probably... Judging from what little he knew of the dungeon lady, she probably wasn't too happy there were local nobility trampling about her domain. Okay, I'm just trying to get a description of this damn tour guide. Short. Let's give this one to Gary as well.
Most of the lab's efforts focus on adapting netherworldly crops to survive in... Most of the lab's efforts focus on adapting netherworldly crops to survive on Ivalian soil. The guide was saying. We also develop advanced remedies and antidotes. I lack the clearance to mention our efforts into custom poison designs, but let's just say that some of our remedies solve every single issue the host has. Permanently. A stern woman with short silver hair frowned in a way that reminded Steros of the tutors he'd had in his youth.
Cabbages, poisons, and remedies, she said. This all sounds much better than the armies of monsters we were promised would defend us against the militant army. When they storm the walls of Constantina, we can launch flaming cabbages at their ships.
Steros had heard that same sarcastic tone whenever his teachers had reprimanded him for slacking off in his studies. Marshal Kessa turned to face the woman, wearing the impassible expression of a career soldier dealing with a bureaucrat.
An army needs cabbages to eat, Viscountess. An army needs cabbages to eat, Viscountess. Even an army of monsters. Unless you prefer a starving horde of mutated fiends using Undercity as their main source of protein. Unless you prefer a starving horde of mutated fiends using Undercity as their main source of protein, that is.
The avian relaxed her relaxed her expression just a touch. The avian relaxed her expression just a touch.
A war is fought and won over the bellies of the soldiers, as my old sergeant used to say. Don't worry about monsters. When the time is right, they will come.
As we were promised, said one of the politicians. As promised. Chronicler Alder said happily. Come on, people, relax a little. We're running an honest-to-murmur dark operation here, so there's nothing to fear. We are utterly trustworthy. He beamed a smile at the confused expressions directed his way. From what Steros could tell, the bard was being serious. But they are right, you know. Steros muttered to Kleck as the short guide brought the group along a snaking path through several laboratories and workshops.
The bureaucrats seemed mollified at the sight of the furnaces manned by skeletal arms, which pumped out enchanted spearheads by the dozen as constant fumes of smog rushed upward from burnished brass pipes and into the ceiling.
Marshal Kessa can talk logistics all she wants. It's all smoke and mirrors without an army. And without a leader to rally around, the haunt is a snake without a head.
Kleck looked up at him with round, childlike, bat-blin eyes.
Yes, but they don't need to know that. They are afraid, Lord Luris. In the wild, fearful bat-blins often turn against one another, which makes a lot of noise and often lets the wolves they were hiding from know exactly where they are. People, I think, are the same as bat-blins.
Without them noticing, the tour had left the pair behind, swallowed by the serpentine depths of the industrial corridors of the Standard Factory. Steros thought he could still hear their footsteps echoing in the distance.
We should follow them, he muttered.
Kleck and the young man exchanged looks.
Or not,
Kleck said, one of his ears now standing at pensive attention.
Or not,
Steros agreed with a small, mischievous smile. It had been so long since he'd had a chance to misbehave that even this tiny act of rebellion made his heart begin racing in his chest. Although neither of them knew it, biologically they were about the same age. Boys rushed into early adulthood by the necessity of their respective communities. As one, they turned away from the sound of the footsteps and off they went without a second thought. Of course, they got lost almost instantly. In any other circumstance, two unarmed persons wandering around the legendary Factory of Nightmares would have been a sure death sentence. In any other circumstance, two unarmed persons wandering around the legendary Factory of Nightmares would have been a sure death sentence. Members of the factory's new management, however, enjoyed some privileges. Automated ballistae saw their passing without disturbing them, while maintenance bots skittered mechanically above their heads. Away from Marshal Kessa's curated route, the true chaos of the factory unfolded around Bat-Blin and Dungeon Lord. Dozens of those slender, impossibly large skeletal arms that Steros had first seen during the start of his trip diligently loaded rows of silver-plated cages. Dozens of those slender, impossibly large skeletal arms that Steros had first seen during the start of his trip diligently loaded rows of silver-plated cages onto horse-sized copper beetles with flat backs ready to transport cargo. Black, fiendish claws extended out from some of the cages and swiped at Steros and Kleck as they passed by at a prudent distance. A rusty catwalk brought them underneath a massive iron container full of dark water. There, a couple of fiends stood at the tank's edge and oversaw a mechanical beetle as it slowly lowered a bloody cow carcass into the tank via a long loading cane installed on its back. One of the fiends caught sight of Kleck and Steros above and waved at them. Just as a tentacle as thick as a man exploded out of the water, enveloped the carcass like a snake, and dragged it down into the depths. It was followed by the cane, and then the beetle, and quite nearly the fiends, too, had they not jumped out of the way at the last second. When the two of them passed an aging iron doorway, they found a sort of dilapidated holding cell. When the two of them passed an When the two of them passed an aging iron doorway, they found a sort of dilapidated holding cell, empty except for ancient yellowish candles, half melted and long forgotten. Silver magical circles engraved over every surface glittering like dying starlight under the faint industrial light streaming in... Silver magical circles engraved over every surface glittered like dying starlight under the faint industrial light streaming in from behind. Silver magical circles engraved over every surface glittered like dying starlight under the faint industrial light streaming in from behind Steros's back. The smell of dust and rust filled his nostrils as Fuck me. The smell of dust and rust filled his nostrils as Kleck tugged at his sleeve and pointed at the end of the cell. There, engulfed by shadows, waited the crucified shape of a long-dead fiend, its extremities held in place by iron manacles and its emaciated ebony skin covered in dry ampules. Steros met the gaze of unseeing, empty ocular cavities and shivered. He had never seen a creature like this, yet nevertheless it seemed awfully familiar. Showing common sense uncommon for their age, Steros and Kleck retraced their steps out of the chamber and closed the door, neither saying a word about what they'd seen there. Eventually, they reached the dreaded iron railways that had almost given Steros a heart attack less than an hour prior. Kleck gave him a malicious smile as the Batblin reached out to a concealed control hub and started to manipulate a couple of levers seemingly at random. A few seconds later, a wooden and iron cart rolled out of a nearby tunnel to a stop in front of them. Steros took a step backward, shaking his head. Then he caught sight of Kleck's cocky grin as the Batblin jumped inside the cart. "You aren't scared, are you?" was all Kleck said. Steros narrowed his eyes. About 10 seconds later, he was screaming his lungs out as the cart dropped like a boulder into the deep darkness of the factory's lower storage floors. Cold air rushed into his throat, and his head was buffeted by a sudden stream of screeching bats all around them. His stomach felt as if it were trying to exit. His stomach felt as if it were trying to exit through his mouth. Whenever he opened his eyes, the encroaching shadows of surrounding supports jumped at him, way too close to the cart's route for comfort. Just what kind of madman had designed these damned things? At some point, without him noticing, his screams had become mixed in with howls of laughter. Next to him, Kleck had both arms extended above his head, his fur like a frizzy mop and his ears flopping wildly behind his head. The adventurer slayer was yelling something that sounded quite similar to... Whee! Then Lord Steros, proper Lotian dungeon lord, last heir of his house, cripple, disappointment, and someone who had forgotten the meaning of fun a long time ago, did something unexplainable. He threw his arms above his head, and for one blissful moment didn't think about his stumps or his house or his grim fate. The darkness lost its looming, threatening edge and felt more like a comforting respite. The darkness lost its looming, threatening edge and felt more like a comforting respite, the caress of a mother he barely remembered. All right, guys, I'm going to have to be done here. I have a meeting that starts in about 3 minutes. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. I will be back at it tomorrow morning starting at 10 a.m. So watch out, 10 a.m. Central. So watch out for notifications. Thanks again. I hope you had a good time. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.